Good evening, dear delegates from on the webinar. This webinar is sponsored by Panacea Biotech Oncology Division, and today's topic is multiple myeloma, approaching OPD diagnosis by primary physicians. As we are experiencing, which we never ever imagined that total lockdown in the country, in the world, and living life with the lockdown, which has impacted many more in terms of healthcare workers overall, doctors, hospital staff, as well as the patient. When we talk about the cancer patient, it was very challenging because treatment is for the life survival, diagnosis is also related with the survival of life, and overall management and patient visit to the doctor is very important. Panacea Biotech is continuously with the oncology and the care of cancer patients. We have started our journey in 2011 by introducing nano-albumin-bound paclitaxel, first global generic, which is used for CA breast. Onwards, so we have launched the many other drugs for the cancer, and importantly today for the blood cancer. We are going to discuss about it, and challenges for the patients to diagnose very first is that with which doctor they are visiting for the which body complaints. In India or across the globe, for any body complaints, the patient first visit to their family physician, primary physician, and with their complaints, it is a skill and the technique what the doctors are practicing and picking up the diagnosis at very early stage. It may be the fever, bone pain, or joint pain, or backache. What physician's mind reads leads to the final diagnosis, or it may take the long time for the doctor and for the patient to reach to the complex diagnosis like cancer. And we are wasting the long time in that period, and that wastage of the time may compromise the patient's life, may compromise the patients to time to get the treatment, may compromise patients to undergo for the surgery, which could have saved their life from the deadly cancer diagnosis. To understand this, how to diagnose it with the small bodily complaints which patients are presenting in the OPD, we have Dr. R.M. Subbiah. Dr. R.M. Subbiah has done his DM in oncology from one of the prestigious institute in country, that is CMC Vellore. He has completed his MD medicine from PGI Chandigarh, another one of the best institute from India. And Dr. Subbiah has graduated his medical qualification MBBS from Madurai Medical College. At present, he is a hematologist and BMT physician, and he is interacting with the hemato-oncologist and the bone marrow transplant physicians and at the Kaveri Hospital, Trichy, Tamil Nadu. We have the opportunity today to discuss about the complaints what the patients are coming in the OPD and the primary physicians interacting, and how to approach the myeloma diagnosis at very early stage is very interesting to know. I request Dr. R.M. Subbiah to enlighten us on the myeloma approach of physicians. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, one and all. So this is a very short presentation about basics about myeloma and how a primary care physician approaches it. Okay, when you see, because they are the ones who see these patients first. And I'll be going through the slides slowly. Very simple presentation. I hope most of you would follow. Next slide, please. So why primary care physicians are the target? You see, generally, when a detrimental disease like myeloma is there, and especially when it is of an insidious onset, so those are the diseases which are very vulnerable because they go often unnoticed with the patient for a long time until they are picked up at a situation where nothing much can be done. So if a disease which is going to progress slowly over time, then it has to be thought of again and again by a primary care physician who is going to pick up. Because early diagnosis is definitely going to be the key, which can reduce the mortality obviously the quality of life, morbidity, everything. So you have to see, it's easy, always easy to pick the symptoms when the classical symptoms come for a disease. But before that, you have to be smart enough to pick up those symptoms which cannot be picked up easily by any of the doctors in the community. So there's a big, you have to be aware, and a highly suspicious diagnostic indicators are needed to do that. Next slide, please. So we know that myeloma is an incurable disease. Incurable in the sense it can be controlled by treatment with the current standard of care, what is available, but ultimately they relapse. It's a malignant neoplasm and it originates from the plasma cells. So plasma cells are the terminally differentiated B cells, which are supposed to form antibodies in response to an antigen stimulation. But when they get malignant, when a neoplastic clone originates, then they don't do their job. So then it turns out to be a malignant clone, produces malignant cells and antibodies from them, which cause all the damage in the body. The abnormal protein, what is produced from those neoplastic plasma cells, is the M protein, we call. That is the monoclonal protein. And the pathology in this disease is either due to the cell infiltration itself or the abnormal protein, what is produced from them. The cellular infiltration into the organs like kidneys or bone marrow, or any visceral organ might impair the function of that organ, and the protein goes and deposits in various organs and does not allow the particular organ to do its job. And that's why this disease has a fascinating pathology. If you read through, it could be just histological due to the cells, or it can be dynamic all due to the pathophysiology because of the protein. Next slide, please. And this is a simple picture which just says you that the abnormal plasma cells, which are formed in the bone marrow, they produce an abnormal antibody. The abnormal antibody just accumulates in the blood. They are useless protein which accumulate in the bloodstream and then go and deposit and cause all the damages. And this happens at the expense of reduction of normal antibodies. So the normal plasma cells don't function, the normal antibodies are not formed, and eventually leads onto an immunocompromised state. The patient succumbs to multiple infections. Next slide, please. So as I told you earlier, there's a serious problem with all the disorders with the insidious onset. When they start slowly, they just go on creeping, gradually they grow, they get adapted with the body, and hardly the patient complains. The patient also adapts to the pathology, whatever is happening, and the doctor also finds difficult to pick up these things because it's not often brought up by the patient. They don't take it as a concern. They don't complain much to the physicians. So the doctor has to be really intelligent in picking up diseases like this. So it just goes undetected and it's misdiagnosed. Very hardly people diagnose myeloma at an earlier stage. And the delayed diagnosis, the price paid is very high. It can just limit the quality of life and often can lead to mortality. And you just see this data, just like in any other malignancy, the 5-year survival is almost 70% if it's picked up very early. And once it's advanced, it's hardly less than a half of the population survive with the disease. Next slide, please. So, but over the last two decades, if you see, this detrimental fatal disease has seen a lot of improvement due to the evolution in the treatment. A lot of novel agents have come, and the usage of chemotherapy, the toxic cytotoxic chemotherapy, has come down, and people have started understanding the pathophysiology more at the genetic and molecular level, and they started targeting the abnormal problems, whatever is happening within the cell, and the toxicity to the other bystanding cells are not much. And that has led to an increased survival. And apart from that, obviously, like any other malignancy, the supportive care, like the availability of a broad spectrum antibiotics and the transfusion support, has really made a significant improvement in the survival rates of myeloma. So these are the two things with the novel agents and the supportive care. Supportive care in the sense, it could be just antibiotics, transfusion, physiotherapy, rehabilitation, all those have made a significant impact on improving the survival of myeloma. Next slide, please. So if you see about the incidence, it accounts for 1% of all the malignancies. And if you just take the blood malignancies, around 10% are contributed by myeloma. And this is by the Western literature, the median age is in the 7th decade, but you see Indian population, it presents quite earlier. We have seen as less as 23 years, 24 years old patients with myeloma. And so I would say a decade or two younger in Indian population we see. And obviously men are more susceptible than women, and black population more than the Caucasians or whites. There are conflicting reports about the family history, but it is not convincing enough to say that it is inherited. Okay, but people say that there is a higher chance if one gets in the family, but we don't have enough data as of now to support that statement. Next slide, please. So the most important part of this presentation is how are we going to pick up this deadly disease. So the problems with these are the initial symptoms may be just non-specific, just fatigue, tiredness. The patient may not do his normal activities or job at an efficient rate what he has been doing when he was normal. And that is the problem with all the initial symptoms. And if the disease has advanced, again, the same early symptoms might be just more pronounced. We may not have any particular localizing symptom which can direct us towards a working diagnosis. So often we see fatigue, weakness, sometimes bone pain, which is most often ignored. Some people might have easy bruising, bleeding, if the platelet count goes markedly low. Next slide, please. So commonly, the symptoms are attributed to these changes. They are prone for infections. As you understand, the pathophysiology goes like, you don't have normal antibodies, all are abnormal antibodies. Then the second thing is the kidney involvement. Either due to the disease itself, the plasma cell infiltrates into the kidney, or the paraprotein causing damage to the glomerulus or the tubule. It can be just proteinuria or tubular toxicity. And the third thing is the bone damage done by these cells and protein, which can lead on to easy fracture or to even a trivial trauma, or sometimes it may be even spontaneous and significant bone pain. And a lot of changes happen in the blood compartment in the cellular level. The red cells, white cell platelets might go down, and you can have easy fatigability, infections, and bleeding due to that. And the paraproteinemia, when it's high, it can cause hyperviscosity symptoms, which will be seen later. And the hyperviscosity symptoms depend on which organ. If the symptoms, if the total protein is so high, it can just clog onto those small vasculature. The patient might be irritable, dizziness might be there, and bone pain. Everything can happen because of blackouts, visual blurring. All these can happen because of the high levels of the paraprotein accumulating within the blood. They can even impair with the coagulation proteins and can cause bleeding or thrombosis, depending on whichever the anticoagulants or procoagulants are involved. Next slide, please. So when we consider a diagnostic workup for these patients, obviously when the patient has symptoms pertaining to myeloma, but most of the times you see they are just discovered on a routine blood work during a health checkup, or just when they see a family physician just to do those tests to see if they have any problems once a year or something like that. Or subtle changes can be picked up when they are getting evaluated for some other illness. Next slide, please. But remember, we don't have a single test as of now to just say whether this patient has myeloma or not. So it's a clinico-pathologico-radiological diagnosis. You need all the three things. They have to be put together to come to a conclusion. Just seeing plasma cells in the marrow may not constitute myeloma. Which, similarly, you have to work up all the biochemical abnormalities. You have to show the evidence that plasma cells are there, the paraproteins are produced by them, and paraprotein abnormality is causing organ damage, and accordingly you have a raised creatinine or fractures or light lesions in the bone or a change in the CBC. Next slide, please. So initial blood work, what all we do? We concentrate more on anemia. That's how the definition or diagnostic criteria of myeloma is there. So you see for what is the baseline hemoglobin of that person, which would have come down from the baseline level by more than 1 gram percent or less than 10 grams percent absolute value of hemoglobin, renal insufficiency from the baseline creatinine, whatever has been there for the patient. Usually we take it as more than 2 milligrams percent or creat clearance of less than 40 ml per minute. A raised serum calcium, which is corrected calcium, if it's more than 11 milligrams percent, then we say there's hypercalcemia and elevated protein levels. When the total protein goes high, the albumin comes down. So that these are the 4 things which you'll see when a basic blood test is done. So commonly we see for most of the disorders, we do a simple CBC on LFT and RFT. Most of the things can be picked up from just these 3 panels. We're going to just do a CBC, a renal function, and a hepatic function. That can give you a clue. We look into the CBC, why the anemia is there, how, what type of anemia it is, what is happening to the other 2 lineages, white cells and platelets. You see the renal function test, how the creat is, and also the metabolic parameters when they are done, like total protein and albumin, which are a part of the liver function test. When you order these 3, like for any illness or a simple fever or a weight loss, you're going to pick up most of the things what is required for a myeloma. Next slide, please. So when you see the hemogram, what will you look for? So these things are just, you can just pick up in your OPD. After asking for a history, they're saying, going to say your symptoms, you order for this in an hour or 2, you'll get all these reports. And when you look into the CBC, most of the time, myeloma patients will have anemia, which is usually normocytic anemia. Because hardly we have 3 or 4 causes for microcytic anemia, maybe 5 or 6 causes for macrocytic anemia. Rest of all the anemia comes into the normocytic pool. And an unexplained normocytic anemia, this is one differential which you need to think of. And obviously, along with the CBC, you will see the ESR is markedly high. You have very few causes when you have a ESR more than 100, like myeloma or giant cell arteritis or something like that. And but remember, when the hemoglobin is so low, as 4 grams, 5 grams, never consider the ESR, because your cellular component is going to be very low, and you shouldn't interpret that ESR. It is falsely high because you don't have enough cells in the tube. The rouleau formation occurs fast, the red cells settle fast because there are very few cells, and obviously in the first hour, ESR value is going to be very high. So you consider ESR when you have a hemoglobin of more than maybe 7 or 8 grams percent. Less than that, never consider ESR as one soft pointer for your diagnosis or when you work for some differential diagnosis. Thrombocytopenia and leukopenia usually are not seen. When the marrow infiltrate is to that level, very high, then it might become evident. Otherwise, usually you see anemia, the next might be thrombocytopenia, then rarely you see leukopenia. It will be in that order. And other things, these 3 lineages, when they are affected, it can cause fatigue due to the red cell reduction, infections due to the white cell reduction, or abnormal bruising or bleeding when the platelet count goes down. Next slide, please. So this is one classical phenomena you see when you look into the peripheral smear. You see stacking of red cells, that is a rouleau formation. If it's an artifact due to the smearing event, then all the rouleau would point towards the same direction. But see here, the stacking are pointed at different directions, which just says that they're already stacked. It's not manually done due to smearing. That is one thing. And you might have a bluish background. The white background, which is usually seen on the background of the cells, is not there. The bluish tinge is due to the paraprotein, which could be there. So these are the 2 things which you will see on the smear, apart from the normocytic anemia of the red cells or a reduction in the counts, white cells or platelet count. So normocytic anemia and a bluish background on the back of the smear. Next slide, please. So now just moving on to the next panel, when you do the metabolic parameters, one thing which you will concentrate more, when you have an elderly person with an unexplained anemia or a bone pain, weight loss, just make sure you order for calcium also, because an elderly person can have, usually when we think of anemia and weight loss, we consider malignancies. And malignancies with a bony metastasis or a primary bone pathology itself or a disease like myeloma can change the calcium homeostasis. And you see more hypercalcemia presents in 15% of the patients with myeloma. And when the calcium levels go high, all the neuromuscular irritability symptoms come. So there can be vomiting, nausea, and increased urination, might have CNS symptoms. It can lead on to confusion and even obtundation sometimes. And there's a classical thing said for hypercalcemia. You have an abnormal bone remodeling, the high chance of painful bones, the fracture risk, can have higher incidence of stones and abdominal groans or a psychic, that is the CNS symptoms. But usually we don't see all this. Bone pain is one thing which we commonly see. And when the hypercalcemia is more than maybe 12 milligrams %, and when it's very acute, obviously the CNS symptoms also present. Next slide, please. Protein changes. So this is just picked up from your LFT. So RFT you'll see for raised creatinine or raised calcium. Protein changes, when you see your LFT, your total protein is going to be markedly high. Usually you see around 8 to 9 grams, up to maybe 8.5 milligrams %, but this will be in the order of more than 10, 11, 12 grams %. And your good protein, that is the albumin, is going to go down. Normally you have 2/3 albumin and 1/3 will be globulin. But here you have the paraprotein building up in the serum. So your albumin level might be down and the ratio is altered. So whenever you see an AG reversal, you usually think of chronic liver disease or a nephrotic syndrome. And this is one diagnosis which you need to put down in your list. Though it's rare compared to chronic liver disease or nephrotic syndrome, this should be ruled out because it's a detrimental disease. Next slide, please. And this is another simple investigation which you can do for your OPD patients, skeletal survey. Commonly, we do a plain radiograph. An X-ray can give you so much of information. And if there are any other symptoms pertaining to your neurodeficits like back pain, radiating pain down, or deficits like a cord compression, which is causing all the trouble, then you may need appropriate investigations like MRI. Otherwise, a simple skeletal X-ray, when you target the skull, chest X-ray, long bones, pelvis, should be fine. And one more important thing, when you do a skeletal survey, most of the myeloma patients can have chest infections. And when you have a chest infection in a myeloma, the mortality is so high. It is as high as 50 to 60% when you have pneumonia for a myeloma patient. So you just make sure you see that also, even if it's for diagnosis or even before you start therapy, it's always better to see there is nothing in the lung parenchyma, like an infective foci. And fractures, osteolytic lesions, it's a pure lytic lesion. So you look for those specific loosened areas in the bones. And CT, when you do a CT, just make sure before doing a contrast, the patient is well hydrated, and preferably you don't do a contrast. You can precipitate renal failure. The patient might have a cast nephropathy or already an acute kidney injury would have already been set in. So just make sure you don't do the order for only non-contrast CTs when you see for myeloma. It's up to you whether you do a whole body MRI or a low dose CT, but both are well recommended by the International Working Party for myeloma. Next slide, please. So I've just put this picture. It's a lateral view of your skull, of a patient's skull, showing multiple lytic lesions, which can happen in myeloma or any secondaries of the bone marrow. Next slide, please. And common sites, whenever you think of a hematological disorder or a metastasis, it happens more on the axial skeleton rather than the appendicular skeleton. So axial skeleton, in the sense, the flat bones take over the hemopoiesis. You know from your physiology that at birth, all your flat bones and long bones, they produce red cells, white cells, and platelets. Eventually, the fat replaces them, and only the flat bones function as your age goes on. The long bones are become yellow bones, and the flat bones, they have the red marrow producing activity until the death, even though your percentage of hemopoiesis comes down. So obviously, you're going to see an infiltration in the areas of blood supply or where your active marrow is there. That's why you get metastasis or myeloma in the flat bones rather than the appendicular bones. So you'll see for skull, which is very easy to see for light occlusion just by a simple X-ray. Sometimes you might have plasmacytoma over the scalp. It will be just like a lipoma, but it will be more firm. You might have sebaceous cyst or a lipoma-like swelling over the scalp, which is more firm. Then you think of a plasmacytoma in a patient with myeloma. Or the spine, any of the vertebrae can be involved. And it depends if you have a collapse or a cord compression or an associated epidural soft tissue lesion or a paravertebral soft tissue lesions, it might compromise the neurological function, whatever has been emerging from that level. And pelvis and long bones is less common, but it is possible always. So you have to give more attention to this spinal cord compressive symptom. Examine the CNS very carefully, seeing for the power, tone, and all your plantar reflexes, deep tendon reflexes, everything. Because if you pick up that, that's an emergency. You cannot waste time more than that. The diagnosis has to be made fast. The patient has to be started on therapy to reduce further neurological damage. Next slide, please. And finally, you need a tissue diagnosis, which is, even though you have all sophisticated radiological investigations, ultimately you need a tissue diagnosis, and this is what you look for in the bone marrow, the plasma cells. So these are plasma cells. They have an eccentric nucleus, unlike other cells. It's towards one corner of the cell, and the clear area just near the nucleus is the HOF. And that HOF is closely attached to the nucleus. And you have a deep blue cytoplasm, which has all the immunoglobulin formed within them. And sometimes it may give mulberry or a grape-like appearance, showing all globules of these immunoglobulin protein with them. The chromatin is described as cartwheel pattern. You have areas of alternating light areas and dark areas. Okay, so that is one characteristic feature we say as cartwheel chromatin in the myeloma cell. So, but remember, it depends on where the marrow is sampled also. All the myelomas don't have enough plasma cells because it's a patchy disease. Within the flat bones, it's still some areas might have more plasma cells concentrated, some areas might have less. Unlike leukemias will have diffusely everywhere. It will be evenly distributed. You will have just blasts because cells are also proliferating fast. They just don't limit boundaries. They just go on infiltrating everywhere. But myelomas and lymphomas, myelomas are slow-growing tumor. The cell when you see the cells, they are terminally differentiated B cells. So they don't divide fast like a leukemic cell or any other fast-growing tumor. But the damage caused by them is immense because it just causes immunoparesis. Your immunology is gone. The normal production of antibodies go down. So the patient succumbs to the infections or bleeding because of a low platelet count, and rather than the tumor infiltration itself. So that's why you may not see good enough number of plasma cells in all the marrows. Aspirate is needed to see for these cells, and a biopsy is going to give you an architecture of the bone marrow. And bone marrow is just an OPD procedure. So it can be just aspirated. Even if you can't take a biopsy, you see for the peripheral smear, rouleau formation, bluish background is there, and putting in into account all the symptoms and whatever hepatorenal functions and CBC with you, and radiological picture. A bone marrow aspirate might just show you plasma cells and almost a diagnosis is made. Next slide, please. And this is an important slide for all the physicians because this is one thing which is missed. After a long workup, maybe 2-3 weeks of workup, then we discover that there is myeloma for this patient. One could be an unexplained renal failure, or especially when you have a renal failure with normal size kidneys. It's chronic kidney disease, contracted kidneys, it's fine. If you have a normal size kidneys, you have hardly few differentials. One could be diabetes mellitus with the diabetic nephropathy, or you can have polycystic kidneys, which are very rare and which can be easily picked up by ultrasonogram, or it could be HIV nephropathy, or myeloma or amyloidosis is the other differential which you would consider. Especially in a non-diabetic patient, if you have a large kidneys, certainly you will have to rule out myeloma. And an unexplained normostatic anemia. Then the anemias, when you have a normostatic picture, inflammation, malignancy, renal disease comes as differential diagnosis. Mainly inflammation, you have renal anemia and malignancy, infiltration, something like that. Because very few causes for microcytic, few for macro, rest all comes into normostatic. And an unexplained age reversal, as I already told you, markedly raised ESR, but as I told, just make sure your hemoglobin is 7 or 8 grams and above, not to comment on ESR when you have a hemoglobin of 2 grams or 3 grams. And unexplained neuropathy, that is one symptom which is usually can be a Poem syndrome, or just a light chain myeloma can involve the peripheral nerves, especially the sensory neuropathy is one thing which you need to. Unexplained sensory neuropathy, make sure you do a paraprotein levels or light chain assay to see for amyloid or a paraproteinemic, dysproteinemic neuropathy. Next slide, please. And when you specifically target myeloma, you need to see what is the paraprotein. So you need to see whether the paraprotein is there or not. And if it is there, how much is there? And if the paraprotein is there, you also make sure you prove the clonality. Okay. And finally, you need some sensitive assays like free light chain assay when you can't pick up the M protein. So this is how you work up for a paraprotein, and it's usually available as a panel, a simple blood sample from the peripheral blood, and all these things can be done. But make sure you have a good clinical scenario before ordering these. Otherwise, even infections will have changed protein levels. You might have hypergammaglobulinemia, but clonality might not be there. You might not have M bands. The light chains may be altered during infection. Then you might be in trouble. So with a good history and a good examination, and if you have all the CBC hepatorenal functions pointing towards this with a marrow plasmacytosis, then you interpret these values. Next slide, please. So what is serum protein electrophoresis? Just based on the physical properties of the protein in the serum, albumin globulin, an electrophoretic separation occurs when the protein is made to run through a charged field with an anode and cathode in place. Different proteins settle at different levels. So that is all physics. So, and if an M protein is there, it will settle at the beta gamma junction or at the gamma region. So you'll have alpha, beta, and gamma. This abnormal protein settles at the end of beta or the gamma. Okay, and you see, almost 80% of the patients with myeloma will have this M protein. Next slide, please. And this is the simple picture of an electrophoresis. You know, 2/3 of the protein in the serum is albumin. So obviously you will have a large peak for albumin. And the rest of the proteins, like all those transferrin, ceruloplasmin, all those proteins will just fall into place within alpha 1, alpha 2, beta, or gamma. Whenever you have an infection, you have a raise in gamma globulins, but you will never see a peak. It will be a gentle raise in plasma, and it falls over slowly. You will not have a peak like this. If you have a peak like this, then you think of a monoclonal protein. If you don't have a peak, you don't consider it as monoclonal, then you need higher sensitive assays for that. So you shouldn't just see the fraction of protein, what is given in numbers. You try to interpret the densitogram or the graph, whatever is provided with the report. You try to see the numbers and then correlate. The area under the curve will give you the fraction of protein. High amount of albumin, you will have more area below the albumin. If you have less albumin, hypoalbuminemia, obviously your rest of the component, the globulins, the beta and alpha, gamma proteins are going to be high. Next slide, please. So immunofixation is once you have seen an M protein, then you see for the clonality. Because you have understood in your physiology that whenever an antibody is formed, it has heavy chain fragment and a light chain fragment. They form and they combine. We have this rejoining phenomenon. So you have usually in the myeloma, you see heavy chains G, A, or M, and light chains kappa and lambda. When you have a monoclonality, that protein just expresses any one of the heavy chains or one of the light chains. So here you are seeing bands in the M protein, IgM and lambda. So this is an IgM lambda. This is how we interpret. If you have if you have band at M and A on both the light chains, then it's unlikely to be a myeloma. So first you see electrophoresis, then you look into the immunofixation to see for clonality. IgE and D, they are very rare, so usually it's not included in the conventional immunofixation panels. GAM are usually reported and kappa and lambda. But make sure in the densitogram, when you see a protein, it is always monoclonal before saying it as myeloma. Next slide, please. And the free light chain is if suppose you don't get an M protein and you're just thinking it could be a light chain myeloma where heavy chains are not produced by the neoplastic cells, then you order this test. But it will be done with the panel usually, and it increases the sensitivity. And even for your monitoring treatment later to see what is the magnitude of reduction, there also you would need this assay. And always for a myeloma defining event, you have to have, you should have the kappa or a lambda. It has to be 100 times that of the other. If suppose kappa is 1, the lambda must be 100. Kappa is 2, it must be 200, something like that. 100 times, one should overrule the other. Then you say it's definitely neoplastic. Because normally you have a ratio of maybe 0.3 to 1.6. One is just less or over the other, maximum 2 times, not more than that. And that is usually reactive. It's not neoplastic. Okay, because usually you see when a value is reported in the kappa or lambda, your next nearby you'll have a reference level. And moment it's more than the reference level, you'll think that is abnormal. That is not so. Okay, when all reactive conditions, because most of the times people will have some occult infections when you do tests. That's why they come to the hospital. So when you do them, if it's above, if it's not within the reference level, don't consider that as abnormal for a paraproteinemia. You see whether one is more than 100 times the other. If it's not so, then you need some more investigations to support your diagnosis. This may not be the single test to answer your question. Next slide, please. So this is a simple picture which says you about the heavy chains and light chains. You have read in your physiology about the antigen-antibody combination, how they form. Why you have paraproteinemia, hyperviscosity symptoms with IgM myeloma, that is the answer. You see the picture, the combination, the protein Dalton is very high. So the molecular weight of the protein, IgM protein, is very high because so many antibodies fuse to produce that structure. So it's naturally going to be heavy. So that's why you have a higher amount of viscosity because of IgM myeloma. When the IgM paraprotein forms, the molecular weight is more, so viscosity is more. That is what you see as Waldenström's macroglobulinemia. Okay, then the next denser one would be IgA, then comes IgG. Similarly, you have light chains, kappa and lambda. So one has to be almost 100 times than the other. When the heavy chains are not there, then you go and chase the light chains. Next slide, please. So this is a simple table which says you the monoclonal gammopathy of MGUS, smoldering myeloma, and multiple myeloma. This is a spectrum. MGUS is a precursor lesion which originates from the neoplastic cells, but it's not potent enough to produce a clinical defect. So smoldering is it produces damage, but it's not easily detectable or visible outside. But the damage goes on. The patient is not symptomatic. Finally, multiple myeloma, that is overt myeloma, where the patient becomes symptomatic. So in an MGUS, you have an M protein of less than 3 grams per cent. Okay, for 100 ml of plasma, you have only 3 grams of serum. You have only 3 grams of M protein, less than 3 grams. If it's IgG or IgM, obviously IgM is going to have a different value. Then you should have a clonal bone marrow plasma cell. That is, plasma cells should be more. Even a tuberculosis or a simple sepsis can have high plasma cells in the marrow, but they are not clonal. It has to be, you have to prove clonality. How? By an IHC usually, or some molecular techniques. But you have to show the light chain restriction. Neoplastic cells will have light chain restriction. They will just produce only kappa or lambda. That is how you show clonality. And you shouldn't have any end organ damage like hypercalcemia, renal failure, bone lytic lesions, or anemia. So that is CRAB criteria, CRAB, calcemia, renal failure, anemia, bone lytic lesions. So no CRAB, less than 10% plasma cells, and less than 3 grams percent protein. Less cells, less protein, no end organ damage. You call it as MGUS. When you have an M protein in more than 50 years old, and if there are no symptoms, then it could very well, it could be an MGUS. Okay, and MGUS is prevalent in the population when it's 3 to 4% in more than 50 years of age. When you sample 100 normal people in the population above 50 years, you will pick up 3 or 4% of MLANs. So it doesn't mean that they have myeloma. You say they have myeloma only when you have an end organ damage or if the plasma cells are very high, like how I'll be describing it later in that part of diagnosis. Smoldering myeloma is your protein level goes beyond 3 grams percent. Your plasma cells go beyond 10%, but they are less than 60% in the marrow. But still you haven't got any end organ damage. The CRAB features have not yet come, but the cellular component or the paraprotein component is gone more. It's an impending myeloma. Next stage, it is just going to land up in overt myeloma. That is what is smoldering myeloma. You need to pick up this phase because it's also an indication for treatment as per the current guidelines. Previously, no end organ damage, no treatment. You wait. But currently, people have started following up patients with smoldering myeloma and have seen the progression is faster than and higher. The risk is higher than that of MGUS. So that's why we treat early when you pick up a smoldering myeloma, especially when we have certain molecular high risk population. And overt myeloma, it's very simple, more than 10% plasma cells in the marrow, and you should have the CRAB criteria, that is hypercalcemia or renal failure, anemia, or a bone lytic lesion. Apart from that, there are myeloma defining events. One is more than 60% plasma cells in the marrow, or involved versus uninvolved free light chain more than 100. If one overrules the other 100 times, then that single feature is enough to say the patient has got myeloma. Or if you have 2 lesions in the bone, which are at least 5 millimeters, 0.5 centimeters, focal lytic lesions in the bone, you can do a low dose whole body CT or a whole body MRI to pick up those. So currently, when we do a CBC, LFT, RFT, and then show bone marrow plasma cells and do the paraprotein panel, that is all is enough. But suppose you have bone pain, you don't have all the enough parameters what is supposed to be seen in your CBC, LFT, RFT, or the paraprotein, just a light chain is there, then sometimes you may need a whole body radiology to show that there is an end organ damage. To say overt myeloma, if you have an end organ damage, it's enough. But to say the patient has MGUS, then you need to work up more. To say that he has not got any end organ damage or pathology, you have to show that the radiology is normal, the end organ damage is not there. So that is how it is. So next slide, please. So this simple picture just says you how the pathophysiology goes on from the post-germinal center B cell. MGUS is formed from the clone of plasma cells, then it goes into smoldering myeloma, then ultimately plasma cell leukemia. Plasma cell leukemia is something you call when you see plasma cells in the peripheral blood. Normally, you don't see plasma cells in the peripheral blood. Just like leukemia, when you have more than 20% blast, you call as leukemia. Similarly, plasma cell leukemia is when you have more than 20% plasma cells in the peripheral blood, you call it as a plasma cell. Normally, you don't see plasma cells in the peripheral blood. It happens sometimes in plasma cell leukemia. Okay. Or the other criteria is when you have more than 2,000 absolute cells, plasma cells per microliter of blood. Just like your hypereosinophilia, you say more than 450, or hypereosinophilia more than 1,500. Similarly, for a plasma cell leukemia, when the count is more than 2,000, then you think of a plasma cell leukemia. Why I'm saying this is, suppose you have 20% plasma cells, you can straight away call it as a plasma cell leukemia. Sometimes you may have only 10% plasma cells, but your count might be 20,000. So then it satisfies the criteria to say it has a plasma cell leukemia. So down, and the same picture, if you see down, for a post-germinal center B cell to begin MGUS, you need some primary genetic events. Just like any other tumor, there has to be some event happening, initiating the event, and then something has to propagate it. For initiating the event, it can be just an Ig, immunoglobulin heavy chain translocation or a hyperdiploidy that initiates, but that genetic event is not enough to progress to a myeloma. So you need additional hit, like abnormal chromosomal number abnormalities or hypomethylation of the DNA or further acquired mutations all can push the cell to become more malignant and produce more paraprotein and cause end organ damage. Similarly, there is a part played by the tumor microenvironment also. That, like any other tumor, the vascularity is the main key feature there. When the tumor has to grow, you need more vessels. More angiogenesis, the better the tumor is going to grow. It's going to be more aggressive. At the same time, it's also easily amenable to therapy because once you cut down the vascular supply by agents, anti-angiogenic agents, the tumor is going to get infected or it's going to get necrotic. Next slide, please. So the MGUS is an important precursor lesion. As I told you, I have given you this data already, more than 50 years of age in the general population, that is normal individuals, not patients. You will see 3 to 4% population are being harboring the M band in their serum. And this precedes myeloma, you know, and when you ask for how much risk is there, whether this person will progress on to have a myeloma later or not, that depends on his genetic makeup and what are the mutations he's going to have. And usually they don't have symptoms, and 10% of the individuals diagnosed with myeloma will have an MGUS already documented, provided you would have picked, you have evaluated him earlier. And there is a risk of 1% per year of transformation or a progression from MGUS to myeloma. Next slide, please. In a smoldering myeloma, it progresses at a faster rate. It's not 1% like MGUS. It progresses at a rate of 10% per year. That's usually in the first 5 years. If the patient does not progress in the first 5 years, there's very less likely is going to transform further. Then the rate decreases to 3%, and then further it comes down still lower. That is what is smoldering myeloma. Next slide, please. And this simple flowchart will tell you whether the patient has got MGUS, smoldering myeloma, or a myeloma. You see for end organ damage first. It's easy to pick up. Renal failure, hypercalcemia, anemia, or lytic lesions. Then straight away you call as any myeloma, but you just document and show that evidence of M protein is there, and you show the plasma cells. Then your diagnosis of myeloma is made. If you don't have the end organ damage and your paraprotein is there but less than 3 grams percent and plasma cells are less than 10 grams percent, it's going to be MGUS. And if it's more than that, no end organ damage, it's going to be smoldering myeloma. Next slide, please. And I won't go into the treatment. This is one basic slide about the treatment of myeloma. The first thing you'll see after stabilizing the patient is whether he's transplant eligible or not. Transplant eligibility, as per the current norm, it's approximately 65 years of age. It doesn't mean that beyond 65 you shouldn't transplant. If the patient is not having any comorbidities, is fit enough, then you can still consider a transplant. It's just physician's judgment. Less than 65 years and no much comorbidities, he has to be transplanted. That's the current standard of care. You need to give an induction regimen to bring the tumor under control. Once the tumor is under control, then you can consider a autologous transplant. Okay, and or sometimes you may delay giving some maintenance, and when he relapses, you can do a transplant. That is also accepted. But initially, when the patient is not transplant eligible, you just give the novel agents, continue unless the patient progresses. Okay, this is the current standard of therapy for myeloma. And backbone will be steroid. Along with the steroid, you will have the novel agents. It could be a proteasome inhibitor and an immunomodulator drug. So current therapy of choice would be a bortezomib, lenalidomide, and dexamethasone. BRD is the standard regimen as of now for for newly diagnosed myeloma. And you have a lot of drugs approved over the last 4 or 5 years. The FDA has approved a lot of drugs, and these novel agents have created a marked impact in prolonging the survival. Before 2000, myeloma is almost a fatal disease, nothing much you can do. And the median survival was just 3 years. With the novel agents, it's almost doubled. Now the median overall survival is 6 years with the novel drugs in hand. And it is just an OPD basis therapy. If the patient has no renal failure or infections, after you diagnose, once a week bortezomib, which you are going to give it subcutaneously, and lenalidomide is an oral capsule which you have to swallow, and steroid is also oral. So that is how the treatment is. The induction can be done just on OPD basis if there is no indication for admission like renal failure or an active infection or severe bone pain requiring immobilization or opioid analgesic. Next slide, please. So summing up together, early diagnosis for any insidious disease, just not myeloma. Whenever the disease is insidious, has an insidious onset, then early diagnosis is the only key to diagnose it, to monitor and halt progression. Otherwise, you have lost the game. Just like CKD, almost more than 70% of the kidney is gone, then the creat goes up, something like that. So you pick up early, you halt the progression. That's the only way you can improve the quality of life or the clinical outcome for these patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a really wonderful session. You have touched upon all the clinical signs and symptoms which we supposed to observing patients. Sir, some questions are there, not from the audience, but I'm asking you, in your clinical practice, what are the signs and symptoms which comes to you, which are diagnosed to the multiple myeloma, and at what severity?
Most of the times I get patients, since ours is a referral center, I get patients from the other physicians. Okay, so they pick up bone pain, they evaluate, then they find a paraprotein or an AG reversal, something, whatever parameters they have discussed, then they are referred to me. More than 90% of my patients are referred. They are seen mostly picked up from the physicians. They are the ones to see them first, they pick up, and then they refer. That is how it goes. So very hardly I see a patient coming directly to me with symptoms, with the suspicion of myeloma. They go with the back pain, they get evaluated. Common things are seen first, like urinary tract infections, trauma, disc prolapse. After ruling out everything, then when they evaluate, they pick up a paraprotein, or it turns out to be a myeloma, then they come to me. But when we look for an answer for that question, most likely they come with either weight loss or bone pain. That would be my answer for myeloma. Otherwise, they land up with the physician for easy fatigability, tiredness. They pick up anemia, and further evaluation will give a diagnosis of myeloma.
Yeah. Yes. So, protein plasmapheresis. So, do you recommend that for the severe bone pain which is not responding to NSAIDs, or if there is any underlying pathology and the imaging results are negative? So, do you recommend that it should be routinely tested amongst the physicians if the severe bone pain is there? And what are the other criteria for that?
Paraprotein, at least an electrophoresis has to be done when your bone pain is not answered by your anatomical abnormalities. In an elderly with a trivial, when your impact of injury is not correlating with the bone damage, a trivial trauma or a spontaneous fracture, when you consider a pathological fracture, then definitely this is one differential diagnosis. An elderly person with osteoporosis having a fall and then fracturing the neck of femur or back, fine, I would accept. But a gentle trauma, very trivial trauma or a spontaneous fracture, then I would definitely evaluate. I would look for something causing this event. And straight away, I would never go with NSAIDs as commonly done by the public. They get over-the-counter drugs. That is a serious problem we have, because already these kind of patients might have an injury to the kidney, And on superimposed on that, they take NSAIDs and they might land up with severe renal failure, which may not be reversible completely. So better would be some physical measures, rest, simple paracetamol, hot fermentation. Even if it's a simple problem, it's always better to evaluate and then consider a therapy rather than just blindly giving NSAIDs. So paraprotein levels, yes, it has to be done in any unexplained bone pain, unexplained neuropathy especially, and always try to, even if it's a simple pain, wait and watch or evaluate rather than empirically treat. The old age of clinical medicine is not anymore valid. Now, I would say evidence-based medicine is more important rather than clinical medicine. Medicine has to be strong, but that shouldn't be the only way because sometimes we might burn our fingers. So always in that scenario, evidence-based medicine is always better. Even if you're not going to evaluate and if it's possible to wait and watch, then simple physical measures rather than detrimentally giving some drugs which might change the course of treatment. If there's a dire emergency to treat, you treat with parallelly working up for an diagnosis evaluation. If it's not possible, then you can wait and watch if there is no emergency.
Yeah, I'm just jumping on the same clinical evaluation, what you said, evidence-based versus the clinical. So we classical CRAB, do you get at what time? So what is the time frame from the start of the sign symptoms in the patient and coming for the diagnosis? So what is the importance of CRAB? Do you get this CRAB in one single patient?
Yeah, it's a spectrum. That's why there is no single test for a myeloma. We see it's a clinico-pathological radiological diagnosis, and the CRAB also it varies. We for some reason or unknown, we don't know why certain population get only bone disease, why certain just have renal involvement, just a light chain deposition disease, just amyloidosis. It's very heterogeneous. Till date, what we have learned is the genetic heterogeneity is very high in myeloma. The percentage, the classification itself is too exhaustive. The renal diseases might be just glomerulopathy, amyloidosis, some fast nephropathy, light chain deposition. All are due to one problem, that is the plasma cell and paraprotein, but they present in so different manners. One could be just proteinuria, one could be marked raised creatinine. It's very heterogeneous. So we don't understand the pathophysiology really till date. So some genetic presentations, the predisposition, and the biology of the disease. Some are aggressive, like 17p deletion when they are there, or a TP53 mutation, or a 1q gain, or translocation like 414 or 1416 or 1420. So the high-risk myelomas with high-risk cytogenetics and a genetic predisposition plays a role. That is what I think, because some might just have myeloma, MGUS, some will progress. When they progress, they may just some will have renal failure, bone, everything might be there, hypercalcemia, injured kidney, all the four might be there. Some may not have that, just only one might be there. So it's a very heterogeneous disease. All need to say, when we find one, we should look for the other also.
Yeah. Dr. Vinod Appavu is asking about the imaging. Do we need to scan entire skeleton when we suspect multiple myeloma by X-ray or MRI to demonstrate the bony lesions? So yeah.
So that's what. So to answer that question, I agree it's a patchy disease, but when you have acute kidney injury, raised creatinine, or hypercalcemia, then you are not going to chase the lytic lesion really. Okay, you need to make a diagnosis. To make a diagnosis, you need any one end organ damage and a plasmacytosis, which is clonal, and a paraproteinemia. So you need a biochemical, a radiological, and pathological. All the three arms need to be satisfied. So when you have a renal failure or hypercalcemia, I would not chase the skeletal survey really. But upfront, when you are working up for a diagnosis, it's one simple modality. You can just ask for a skull X-ray. You might get in few minutes within your clinic itself. So it's easy for you to pick up. So that is one thing which skeletal survey is going to help you, like just an X-ray pelvis with the hip joints, or an X-ray of the skull, the lateral view, or the AP view, which is going to show you the lytic lesion. So you'd be more sure that this is something definitely a malignancy I'm dealing with. It may be myeloma, it may be secondaries also. Some other tumor which is causing bone marrow infiltration, especially in the flat bones. So this modality is easy to pick up. So that's why you're doing it. But you decide on those investigations depending on what is your scenario. If you have already almost made a diagnosis that with renal failure or a hypercalcemia or a normocytic anemia with a paraproteinemia, then you may not chase for that much radiology. You may not even need to do a PET or a whole body MRI or a whole body CT. Just a simple skull X-ray and maybe a chest X-ray to say that there is no chest infection prior to starting any immunosuppressant. That is all enough. Okay, but when you are not having enough amount of factors to support your diagnosis, then I would say you consider more exhaustive radiology. Otherwise, you need not select a CT or a whole body MRI upfront. When you have other lesions, then you can limit your radiology. But you don't when you don't have in your parameters there are some patients who might have a normal Z, a normal LFT. There may not be any AG reversal. Calcium might be normal. Creat may be normal. Renal function, liver function, and your CBC might be normal. Still, he might have bone pain, and then you might have a lytic lesion. Then I think definitely you need to do an exhaustive radiology to show that there is an end organ damage. Predominantly, it's a bone disease. So something like that. There are patients like that where it's very difficult to make a diagnosis. All your bloods are normal. Sometimes your marrow may not show 10% plasma cells from the area where you have sampled. So it's difficult. You cannot go on you cannot repeat your marrow for that. So only one marrow you can do. It's a painful procedure. Then if the paraprotein is going to help from there, you can take that soft pointer and then you show a lytic lesion, at least 2 lytic lesions, 0.5 centimeters in size. That is the scenario where you will do an exhaustive radiology. Otherwise, if you have enough factors already to make a diagnosis, then I would never do a PET. I hardly ask for a PET or a whole body MRI in any myeloma patient when I already have a diagnosis with a hypercalcemia or anemia. But if there is a fracture which is causing functional derangement of that area, definitely that part has to be imaged. If there is a pain or the difficulty in moving the arm, then obviously you need to image that part. Otherwise, if you have other parameters to support a diagnosis, some end organ damage is already there with some paraproteinemia evidence and a plasmacytosis, then I would not do a entire or a whole body radiology to show the myeloma. So that would answer Dr. Vinod's question. And one more question this Vinod sir has asked is, do we need to scan the entire skeleton when we suspect myeloma by X-ray or MRI to demonstrate bone lesions? I think that is also included. And select the ideal location to have a better representation. And obviously the flat bones, they harbor marrow till the person is alive. And slowly the rate of hemopoiesis comes down. The appendicular skeleton is already replaced by fat. The fat marrow is more in the appendicular skeleton as the age goes on, but flat bones have still active hemopoietic tissue within them. So that's why you get metastasis in those bones, because the blood supply is active there. It goes there nicely. So the chance of malignant cells sticking there is higher. And also malignant clones which are produced from those plasma cells are also higher. That's why you get in the flat bones. So that is the reason we do a simple skeletal survey when we ask for the radiologies, pelvis with hip joints and skull X-ray and a chest X-ray. Because they present mostly with back pain, we may not get appointments easily for CT or MRI. So that's why a simple LS spine is sometimes done. An X-ray of the spine is also done. So if you ask for a skeletal survey, which you need to do without a CT or MRI, I would ask for a skull, pelvis hip joints, LS spine, and chest X-ray. These 4 things I would ask for as a plain radiograph, because most of the axial skeleton would be covered there and lytic lesions also would be covered there.
Yeah, those are the 2 questions. So what is reflecting here, you can also see. What thing is that about the family history? So how frequently you see the family members are getting impacted?
It's very, very rare, sir. Usually we don't see. Hardly I have come across any patient like that. so far until my practice. There are conflicting reports since it's been published. That's why I put a query mark there, because we don't have enough data to support that evidence still. So as of now, I would still say it's a sporadic genetic event. There is no inherited or a familial hit happening to the chromosomes there. Still, it would be a sporadic mutation which is causing all the damage.
Sir, it's you almost covered everything. This fantastic, really enlightening, and right from the simple bone pain in OPD clinic till the bone marrow aspiration and testing for the plasma cells, right, and finding the abnormalities of that and M proteins analysis. With this multiple myeloma is really challenging. OPD diagnosis is difficult. It needs to go serially, and to reach up to you will take a longer time. So a primary physician plays most important role into this, and this is of your session will definitely make them doctors to keep in on their radar that whatever the complaints do come, they need to check for the hypercalcemia, need to check for the renal function test. Bone pain really need to get diagnosed at the right time in the right way. Pathology, hematology, imaging, and the clinical diagnosis plays most important role. With this, on behalf of Panacea Biotech and Oncology BU, we thank you, and we look forward to have such a very niche and very useful for the clinically practicing doctors to pick up the cancer patients with the simple OPD complaints, which are leading to the more fatal disease diagnosis. So really thanks, and I want that to give the concluding remark from you to the practicing physicians that for multiple myeloma, what are the things we need to look during examining the patient?
Yes, sir. As I already told, this session is mainly for common primary physicians, because they are the ones who are going to see these disorders first. In a busy practice in a country like ours, I think the clinician has to be really smart to pick up, because the patient may not complain symptoms for all these insidious onset disorders, because these diseases, they just start slowly. The patient may not notice, they may not give importance. They prioritize their household job or household work or job in comparison to these small issues. Over the time, they get adapted to these abdominal pain or easy fatigability and all. So they don't pay attention. When something is happening in acute, like a shock, we break from our routine and address that. When something is not happening acute, when it's slowly happening, it's more like we just acclimatize to that and we don't pay attention to that. So disorders with insidious onset, gradual progression, according to me, are very dangerous rather than like sudden onset like trauma or myocardial infarction. They bring the patient directly to the hospital, but disorders like these never brings the patient. The physician has to chase them when they come for something else or in a routine health checkup. The acute ones, patients come with presentation. The insidious onset gradual ones, the physician has to chase, or the health checkup or the health team has to chase, or there has to be enough awareness created by the government or the other clinical teams, whichever is providing services in a respective country. More effort to diagnose patients with these disorders, because otherwise they present late and nothing much we can do at that point of time. It will be usually a bad disorder to diagnose them. That would be my take on this disease. And I would really thank the Panacea Biotech for providing me a platform and also to revise on the basic guidelines and pathophysiology of myeloma. It was an opportunity for me to refresh myself on the topic and also to bring awareness to the public. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Once again, on behalf of Panacea Biotech and Oncology Division. And I conclude and close this session now. Thank you. Thanks to all participants.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.